This is the second video that explains the details of phenoutilism. If you haven't already, I suggest you watch the introduction and the first supplementary video. This presentation will be about utility sources and the formation of types. Here they are, just to refresh your memory. If you remember, there is an uncountable number of utility sources, but I identified some 8 that I believe to be most important. They are related to physical, metaphysical, objective, and subjective experiences, with an additional axis of action versus reality. And you can see on the screen a column with the maximally positive experiences. What these are, I will explain in a few minutes, although it is probably obvious from the name. If you remember, there is an uncountable number of utility sources, but I identified some 8 that I believe to be most important. They are related to physical, metaphysical, objective, and subjective experiences, with an additional axis of action versus reality. And you can see on the screen a column with the maximally positive experiences. What these are, I will explain in a few minutes, although it is probably obvious from the name. Every experience, if it gives utility, will belong to some 2 utility sources that share the reality/action aspect. For example, if you experience seeing an object, then this is an O plus P type experience. If you experience moving that object, then it is A plus I. Remember, all experiences are just input. Physical/metaphysical describes the source of the input, and objective/subjective describes where that input is stored. For example, the intersection of subjective action and metaphysical action utility sources will contain all utility-giving experiences that arise from actions that both manipulate the world outside of the physical and that manipulate information stored in some human's subjective world/brain. An example of such action would be convincing someone of the immorality of murder. Again, we have 3 axes: source, storage, and reality or morality, or is or ought. That helps us ensure that our utility sources cover all experiences. In fact, they cover them twice. Now we will go into all utility sources in a lot more detail. Remember, all utility sources are sets of utility-giving experiences. The difference is in the kind of experiences that make them up. Physical reality, or P, is a utility source comprised of experiences associated with sensory capabilities. People who value P don't care about survival, reproduction, and death, instead prioritizing their own comfort. They are the reason birth rates are falling in the Western world, which, of course, is not a bad thing in itself, but people make a big fuss about it online. The maximally positive experience associated with P is the most comfortable life until a painless death. Metaphysical reality, or M, is a utility source comprised of experiences associated with the understanding of patterns, meaning, and abstract concepts not tied to the physical world. The greatest pattern is, of course, religion. Imagine a Stone Age tribe noticing a pattern. After a prayer to the sky, the harvest is greater than next year. The maximally positive experience associated with M is a perfectly predictable and harmonious world. Physical action, or I, is a utility source comprised of experiences associated with the manipulation of physical objects, like moving a chair or your own arm. I stands for instinctive, thoughtless action, which is what this experience often looks like. To perform physical actions, you need to survive. So if a person values P, they would want to persist physically, and this desire usually extends to their communities and human structures. The maximally positive experience associated with P is physical immortality or infinite wealth. Metaphysical action, or E, is a utility source comprised of experiences associated with the manipulation of metaphysical reality, most prominently the experience of conscious thought, the generation and spread of ideas. If a person values E, then they will be open to new ideas and information, new cultures, and meeting new people, and seeing new places. The maximally positive experience associated with E is metaphysical persistence. For example, if everyone knows about them or about their ideas. Objective reality, or O, is a utility source comprised of experiences associated with knowledge of the external world. People who value O usually want to see the world in a structured manner. They can be interested in the natural sciences, or if they cannot comprehend them, in religion, astrology, or typologies. The maximally positive experience associated with O would be to know all true statements, or everything about the world. Subjective reality, or S, is a utility source comprised of experiences associated with your own personal beliefs and opinions, and the beliefs and opinions of others. This almost always includes morality. But if a person derives their morality from what they perceive to be the objective world, like the Bible or neuroscience, then the experience of learning and talking about morality could be associated with O instead of S. In other words, I don't like murder is S, murder is bad is O. The maximally positive experience associated with S would be the ability to know true objective morality or to know all beliefs and opinions of all people. Objective action, or A, is a utility source comprised of experiences associated with the manipulation of the external world, like moving a chair. People who value A usually want to achieve some ultimate goal dictated by S, which they also value, of course. Experience of deliberate and conscious planning is also A, because it is a sort of objective action in the head of the planner. A maximally positive experience associated with A would be to change the state of the world to some desirable state. Finally, subjective action, or C, is a utility source comprised of experiences associated with the manipulation of humans' internal state, their beliefs and opinions, most commonly through emotions and communication. A maximally positive state associated with C would be to make everyone believe whatever you believe and hold the same opinions. I mention the maximally positive experiences because they are what fundamental moral disagreements are built on. And as you remember, we use these to determine the value hierarchies of people. So, if you want to know whether they would rank, say, O or S higher, you can ask a person if they would rather learn every fact in the world, except for people's beliefs, opinions, and subjective states, or learn only people's beliefs, opinions, and subjective states. Now let's talk about the necessity pairings and the conflicts between them. People who value comfort often seek it to the detriment of their own survival. At the same time, due to evolution, we seek varied physical experiences if they are available. If there is an excess of resources and comfort, humans channel resources and energy towards thought, idea generation, and innovation. When comfort is scarce, the other two source values take over. Survival and reproduction become paramount, and they are aided by metaphysical information like patterns in nature, arbitrary organization of societies, or abstract moral norms. Physical strength and strength of spirit become more important. These two pairs of values are incompatible. Aggression is the enemy of comfort. Comfort and innovation take resources away that are needed for survival. The other necessity pair conflict we have is between O and C versus S and A. We can communicate knowledge and learn more and more from each other, or we can actually apply that knowledge in a way that is consistent with our desires and opinions. This is largely a conflict of truth versus usefulness, of is versus ought. We can learn and communicate what is, or learn and do what we ought to do. Pursuit and communication of truth that is not immediately applicable takes up resources that could otherwise be spent on the pursuit of some moral achievement. Additionally, morality can be in conflict with the pursuit of truth. You can then choose one option from each of these two dichotomies and get a value group, all of which I discussed in detail in the original presentation. Then, I also mentioned that you prioritize one of these value groups and act in accordance with it. Some viewers might also reasonably ask which one is better for a society, but that is a whole other topic with completely new concepts and ideas. We would have to delve into meta-utilitarianism, compare existing societies, discuss what it even means for one society to be better than another, and much more. However, I will share the conclusion of that discussion here. The best society is one that is comprised entirely of people with the same value group. But again, to explain why would take quite a bit of time. Using maximally positive experiences, we have determined the value hierarchies of people. I mentioned that there are only 16 of them. So how do we get to 16? First, we will notice that all utility sources from one domain are valued more or less than all utility sources from the other domain. This is because whatever their top value is, the other utility sources from the same domain are highly related to that top value. For example, if they value O or truth, then it matters much less what kind of truth, physical or metaphysical, than how to communicate it, or even how to integrate that truth in the real world, or, of course, what to believe, which is the truth. But there are still 4 factorial ways to organize the utility sources within a domain, which gives us 4 factorial squared equals 256 types. Except, we know that inside the domain, one necessity pair must supersede the other. For example, we cannot have something like O then S then C then A, because O and C must be both above or both below S and A. That leaves us with 8 ways to organize one domain. But we will make another crucial observation. Reality or action paired utility sources will be on the opposite ends of the domain hierarchy. What I mean by that is if you have O, or objective reality as your primary value in the domain, then S, or subjective reality, will be the last in this domain. This is just an observation and is subject to review, but I will say that between objective and subjective experiences, people generally respond much better to one of them over the other. The same goes, of course, for the physical/metaphysical domain. Then there is exactly one way to order values within each domain. Then we can have one utility source as our top value, and the next 3 deterministically follow. Then we can select one utility source from the other domain, and values 6 to 8 will also deterministically follow. That gives us 8 times 4 equals 32 values. We are almost there, we just need to make one last observation. If the top value in the utility source hierarchy is a reality utility source like P, M, O, or S, then the 5th value or the top value in the other domain will be an action utility source like I, E, A, or C, and vice versa. That finally reduces 32 types to 16, and here they all are. I could of course be wrong about some of these observations, and I am not too attached to the idea of types. I see them as more of a gimmick than a useful application of phenoutilism. This should conclude the series of introductory videos to phenoutilism. If you want to read through the descriptions of all types, they are available on my website dragondrumsticks.com and on my X account with the same handle. Although at the moment they look like entries of an animal encyclopedia, it's just a compendium of facts. But as I learn more information, I will improve these greatly in terms of content and structure. That's it for this video. Bye.